never slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever...
Hey team, so a huge long run fueling mistake that most runners make in these longer events, especially the marathon distance, ultra marathon, is not taking in enough electrolytes, not taking in enough fluid. And if you're just running by your aid stations and just grabbing a Dixie cup and having the majority of the contents of your Dixie cup spill out on the road, you're not getting enough fluid, you're not getting enough calories, you're not getting enough energy. You need to learn to drink rather than sip. Okay, and I was recently watching a presentation by Jack Hazen, who was my collegiate coach when I was at Malone University. And Jack was talking about Dr. Dave Martin, who's one of the world's top exercise physiologists, and he was saying that most athletes need to be taking in about 6 to 7 ounces of fluid every 20 minutes. So even in the race, if you have to stop briefly to take some Dixie cups and actually drink down them at the aid station, do so. It's much better to lose a few seconds than to lose several minutes later on in the race because you got dehydrated and you weren't drinking enough in the race. Okay, I always talk about for athletes that are training for 10-mile events, 10Ks on the roads, more so the 10-mile half marathon and marathon, to make sure that you're sitting out your water bottles, sitting out your electrolytes, practicing taking in some gels during your long runs, so that again, instead of just running by an aid station and quickly sipping some fluid out of the Dixie cups, grab a couple if you have to, and if you don't want to stop briefly, then grab a couple and hold them as you're running, okay, at least one, and hold the contents in the cup and drink. Instead of sipping, drink. Okay, you have to get in the mindset of getting away from thinking that you can run a marathon with little to no fluid. Okay, most of the time during my 20-mile, 24-mile long runs, I'm taking in anywhere from around 48 ounces to around 60 ounces of fluid during those long runs. Okay, so you have to make sure that you get in the habit of practicing that, so that when you get to the race, especially in the marathon event, that you've practiced finding out how much your stomach can withstand in terms of the fluid. And without a doubt, one of the huge long run fueling mistakes I made over the years is definitely not taking in enough. I didn't know when I first started running marathons in 2002 how big a part nutrition and taking enough electrolytes and calories in the race, how much that matters for athletic performance. Okay, you can be in phenomenal shape physiologically, you can be mentally tough, but if you run out of glycogen, if you run out of fluid and you become dehydrated in the event, in these longer races, half marathons and marathons specifically, okay, this is really where I'm paying most of the focus at for long runs, because the 10K, 5K, although very competitive, it's over within several minutes. Okay, when you're talking about a half marathon or a marathon, this can be over several, a couple hours for some athletes to several hours for other athletes, moving into the marathon distance. Coach Hazen definitely said it in his discussion how the marathon is set up. Okay, and I 100% agree with this. He says basically, and we've heard this before, first 20 miles is basically your warm-up in the race. Okay, and the last 10 kilometers, or the last 6.2 miles, that is where your race really begins. Okay, and I had to learn, like I mentioned earlier here, I had to learn the hard way in terms of fueling and getting dehydrated, and also pacing, improper pacing, going out way too aggressive. I've had several marathons where I'd go out in 108 or 109 through the half and end up running 236 to 240. Two examples of that is the 2011 California International Marathon. I believe I ran 236.28 there. Went out in 108 the first half. Okay, that particular day, I was trying to run faster than where I ran my 2:19:35 PR at the 2007 California International Marathon. So again, I was kind of going after a new PR there. But like I mentioned in other videos, the marathon is totally different. Sometimes you can do everything right in training, and sometimes you can improperly pace, like going out way too fast, and then really pay for it. In my case, I was still at around 2:27 marathon pace through the 20-mile mark, but I ended up running 2:36. Had a really hard time in the last 10 kilometers. So, and again, that was a day where I was just not on compared to when I ran my PR in 2007 on the same course, going out 107.09 and coming back with a 112.26. 2011, I went out like a 108 plus, but I came back with a really slow last half. Okay. And so you have to learn pacing is critical. Sometimes it's very difficult, especially the marathon distance. If you're not paying attention to your nutrition, if your buildup hasn't been 100%, if your pacing is off, to duplicate a personal best, to duplicate a time or an effort that you put up years ago or several months ago, I mean, when you get in that flow state, you know when you're on. Okay, so this is an event where, like Coach Hazen said, I mean, the first 20 miles or the first 32 kilometers is basically, in the marathon event, is more or less the warm up. You know, you got to hang in there. You got to get through that first 32 kilometers and then really drill down and really focus in on that last 10 kilometers. And again, you know, I've made mistakes just like any other athlete. Okay, I've had my second fastest marathon is 2:26:42. In that race, I finished fifth at the 2011 Indianapolis Marathon, Monumental Indianapolis Marathon. I had to jump in a porta-john. So I always tell athletes, make sure, and I was with the leaders. I was running in the lead at that point. I ended up finishing fifth in 2:26:42, but I lost probably about 3 minutes off that time because of that stop. So make sure that when you're preparing for 10-mile races, 20Ks, 25Ks, half marathons, and marathons, your fueling is definitely on point. Your pacing is definitely correct. Go out more conservative rather than trying to go too hard, and don't make the mistake I made, okay? And many other athletes have made. Don't get so hyped up in that first half. Remember, this is two halves back to back, so you can go out and phenomenal the first half. Where are you at the finish line? But also make sure that you are eating your breakfast, preferably 3 hours rather than 2 hours before the start of your race. Okay, start carb loading for your long runs and training several days in advance, and also especially for the marathon, for your main goal race or a half marathon, but more importantly the marathon, because it's an even longer race which requires even more glycogen storage, more focus on nutrition. Start carb loading the 7 days leading into your goal marathon, so you are stocked up on glycogen. Okay, you don't necessarily have to hit the wall in a marathon. I didn't hit a wall when I ran 2:19. I didn't hit a wall really when I ran 2:26. Sure, I was in bad shape. I mean, I was really hurting the last 5 kilometers of both those races. But I've had other races where I have hit the wall, and most of the time in those particular cases where I didn't succeed at 100% in those events was a combination of not drinking enough, not knowing the event enough, and not respecting the event enough, and improper pacing. Okay, it's so important. I mean, I look back even at my debut marathon at the 2002 New York City Marathon. I was a part of a lung cancer research team, Armed Forces team. They basically flew us out there, put us up in the Plaza Hotel for a week, escorted us, picked us up in a limousine, escorted us with police escort to the start line of the New York City Marathon. It was phenomenal. But in that race, we weren't allowed to start the race until every runner had crossed the start line. And for every runner that we passed at the 2002 New York City Marathon, Chase Manhattan Bank was donating $1 for lung cancer research. So we weren't permitted to start the race until every runner had crossed the start line. And then the goal was to pass as many runners as we could. So, but in that race, because I was forced to slow down, my first mile was 16 minutes flat. I still remember running over the Verrazano Bridge, just bobbing and weaving, trying to get through thousands of runners. But I do know, I don't think I would have ran 2:43:36 in my debut, especially without knowing anything about the marathon and not having run any further than a half marathon leading into that. If I wasn't forced to slow down and be held back for about 7 to 8 miles in that race, I wouldn't have run that time. I think it would have been maybe like a high 250, maybe 3:0 something instead of 2:43:36. So sometimes if you're brand new to the event, slowing down in the early stages of a race at that length will definitely help you when it comes to energy conservation, maintaining your form, and running a great time. Okay, but without a doubt, like I mentioned before, a huge long run fueling mistake that so many runners make is not taking in enough fluid in their race. So get in the habit of taking in about, just like Dr. Dave Martin's mentioned, or Coach Hazen mentioned about Dr. Dave Martin mentioning that taking in about 6 to 7 ounces of fluid every 20 minutes. So in most cases, these major marathons, these major events, usually have aid stations out there about every 5 kilometers. So make sure you're not passing up those aid stations. And even when you're at around 40K or 38K, which is right around the last aid station, don't pass that aid station. Drink, don't sip. Okay, that's what I want to leave you all with. Do not sip in the race. Drink. Get in the habit of ingesting enough fluid so that you don't get dehydrated. You maintain your glycogen storage the best you can in that race, and maintain also your form and staying as relaxed as you possibly can, and run the tangents in the race. Don't run any further than you need to in these longer distance races. Okay, so many runners are not paying as much attention to that as they should be. Okay, you already have to run 26.2 miles. There's no need to run any further than that. So I hope this video is helpful for all of you. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave me a comment below. I'll definitely respond back to you. And thank you so much for your support, and I'll talk to you all in the next video.